Hey everyone, this is Lomi, and I recently designed this pattern with the intention of it being a little rain poncho, but I couldn't find any suitable material for a raincoat. Instead, I decided to make it into a little seasonal capelet. My original design used a one-piece method for the body that you can see here, where the sleeves are inset into the solid piece. But I felt that was a little too hard for most beginners, so I added a middle seam to make insertion of the sleeves easier for beginners. The version we'll be making today is done with the seam across the shoulders and sides. The front piece has been cut down the middle to make it into two parts, as you can see, and the back is still a half circle. It's still possible to cut this as one piece if you like the seamless look, but if you decide to try it, I'll trust that you're probably skilled enough to figure out how to make those changes on your own. The front and back should go together at the shoulder with right sides together. I'll pin this in place, then sew the shoulders, using the 1/4 inch seam allowance built into the pattern. After the seams are sewn, I finish the edge with a zigzag stitch. Next is assembly of the hood. The two halves of the hood go together, right sides together, and I sew around the curved edge to close the top and back of the hood, leaving the front and bottom open. This edge gets finished with a zigzag too. Now, I'm using a knit fur fabric that doesn't fray, but if you're using a woven fabric, there are some edges you'll need to finish with a zigzag stitch before hemming. The front edge of the hood is one of these. Since mine is a knit though, I can just skip the finishing and go straight to folding the front edge in by about a 1/4 inch and sewing it down to finish the edge of the hood. Next comes preparing the sleeves. The end of the sleeve is another place you'd need to zigzag before sewing the hem, but again, I can skip the zigzag and go straight to folding the edge in by a 1/4 inch and then sewing it down. I hem both sleeves, comparing them as I go to make sure they're hemmed the same amount. Now the sleeves can be inserted into the cape. I like to start with the ends of the sleeves and then even out the curved part of the armhole along the curve of the sleeve. Once again, this should be pinned with the right sides of the fabric together. I use lots of pins, you may not need as many. Then I sew the sleeve into the cape. The process is repeated for the other sleeve just the same way. Then when both sleeves are in, I finish the edge with a zigzag stitch. This kind of finishing isn't necessary on knit fabric, but I find it always makes things look a little nicer. If you want to include trim on the cuffs of the sleeves, you'll want to do it before closing the bottom edge of the sleeve. I sew my gold trim along the cuffs now, while the sleeves are open and laying flat. You can see the trim is left a little long. It'll get clipped later. After the trim is attached, it's time to close the bottom of the sleeve and the side of the cape. I fold the sleeve closed so it's wrong side out and pin the bottom edge shut. I like to line up the cuff of the sleeve and the seam in the underarm area first, then even out the middle and pin close the side of the cape after that. This way, our seams that are already completed will line up nicely. I pin both sides closed, then sew them shut, starting at the edge of the cape and sewing up into the armpit and then turning to sew down the sleeve. I like to end at the cuff with back stitching because this makes it stronger, and on a thick fabric it's easier to get started where there aren't as many layers of material, so ending at the cuff where it's already hemmed is easier than starting there. Now I trim off the extra gold trim that was added to the sleeves and finish these edges with a zigzag stitch. Once the edges are finished, I turn the sleeves right side out with the help of a dowel rod. Then it's time to finish the edges of the cape. Again here, this is an edge that would need to be finished with a zigzag stitch if it's a woven fabric, but that's not necessary on a knit. I start with the front opening's edges, folding them in by 1/4 inch, and then sewing them in place. The round bottom edge comes afterward. Folding over and pinning that edge takes a long time, but it gets sewn down the same way as the front. The main reason for doing the front and bottom edges separately here is the thickness of my fabric, which doesn't allow my machine to pivot well in the corners. So sewing all the way off the ends of the corners works a little better. At this point, construction is almost done. The last step for construction is to connect the hood by putting the hood and cape together at the neck with right sides together. Like with the sleeves, I find it helps to pin the ends first, then fit the collar of the cape to the hood a little at a time. This helps ensure the hood stays even from one side to the other. Then I sew it on, back stitching at the beginning and end of the seam to give the connection a little extra strength so it won't pull apart. This seam gets finished with a zigzag stitch, and now all that's left is trimming loose threads and adding decoration. I decided to lean into the fall colors and add this leaf trim along the bottom edge using clear nylon thread and a zigzag stitch to hold it in place. Then I add the same loop trim as what I used on the sleeves to the front opening, so it goes along the front edge of the cape and hood. I decide to have this trim end at the leaf trim I already used, so I employ a little super glue on the end of the trim to keep it from coming apart. Now the capelet is done, and the only thing it needs is some kind of closure. There's enough space at the neck that you can use a buttonhole, or you could add ribbons and tie it there instead. I'll just be using a hook and eye at the collar, and my capelet is ready to wear. And that's all for today though. Thanks for watching. Bye.